Bob.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Good. Good to see you.
It's nice meeting you in person.
Finally.
You were one of the first people who I wanted to keep my promise. Where you're like, if you come to Florida,
That's right.
Come
I
by and see
remember
me.
that. Yeah, we talked about that, and I actually said if I came up north, I would do the same, but I haven't, other than Chicago.
I don't think you're missing much in the Northwest. Plus, all the New Yorkers and people from New Jersey are moving to Florida. So,
Yeah, we see a lot of them.
so for people who may not be familiar with you, if you just want to explain like what kind of work you do.
Sure. I can do like a whole short, probably too long bio if you want, but I always call myself an immigrant kid. My parents are both Italian immigrants. I spoke Italian before I spoke English. I was that goofy kid going to grade school with the prosciutto sandwiches on hard crust bread that nobody understood. Worked in my family's Italian bakery from when I was about 14 years old. My brother, who's 2 years older, started when he was about 11, so he's working there a lot more than me. It was just a small family bakery. Had some problems in the 90s with some partners, so my parents sold it. And my brother and my father, my mother opened these bakery restaurants, and they did pretty well with them. And I decided to go to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. A friend of mine worked there, and he said, you know, why don't you come down, blah, blah, blah. So I did. I liked it. To me, it felt like the closest way of earning a living playing sports without actually having to be bigger than a 5'9", 160-pound Italian. So not a lot of us in professional sports.
Right.
So it was just really aggressive, really loud, really fun, really competitive. So I started working down there and worked my way up. Started trading for myself, failed. Worked at a bunch of different firms as an analyst, as a broker, and went and worked as a risk manager at a trading shop. Started trading for myself again. Left the trading floor in 2004 as I saw I was down in the open outcry pits where we were actually screaming at each other and trading.
Like in the movies.
In the movies, like in what's the movie I'm thinking
Trading
of?
Places or something?
Trading Places, yeah, that's the one. That's literally what we did all day. And I saw that coming to an end. So I left, moved to California. Didn't like California, by the way, but lived there for about 4 years. Came back to Chicago after that. And been doing this ever since. Right now I have a company that creates financial content. Then I also have a company that does boutique analysis. So in other words, if there's a firm that wants their own research but is too small to hire a research arm, they hire us. We create the research, and then they put their name on it. It's all contracted out. Then I still trade, and I do a lot of public speaking. That's about it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's an interesting story arc to end up basically working for yourself.
Strange one. We used to joke that, like, if we ever had kids, someday we'd be telling them Dad used to be a baker, which is kind of strange to think about, you know.
Now, are your parents or your family still in the bakery business, or completely out?
So, my father passed away in 2016, but until he was diagnosed with Parkinson's and had some Parkinson's-induced dementia, but they literally had to pull him out of the bakery kicking and screaming. He was one of these 7-day-a-week, 6.5 days when he needed rest, immigrant guys that he worked. That's what he did. That's how he identified. And that's all he did. So he passed away in 2016. Just prior to that, they sold the business to my older brother, who still has it. And
Excuse me.
My mother retired, and he passed away. Then my mother moved out of the house they lived in, and so my family is still in it. But my father's deceased, and my mother's retired.
Gotcha. So, this is a steak you made personally. So far, tasting it's really good.
Cool. I'm glad you like it.
It's really good.
I think I undersalted it, but we'll see.
I'm terrible when it comes to stuff like that. Like, actually, I could have really used a pinch more. I have no idea. I'm like, it was good.
If you see my wife come out and grab the salt shaker, I definitely undersalted it.
Yeah, when I was a kid, my mom didn't cook too often, but when she did, She didn't really use any seasoning. Like we kind of bland food. The most seasoning we use is like adobo. You know, just some
Love adobo.
just very like general kind of thing. But she told me actually not too long ago that it's because of how she grew up. You know, her family didn't like that stuff and didn't like spicy stuff, so that's when she learned how to cook. So that's why, like, when I became an adult and I started having spicy foods, it was I say like a learning curve, but it was like a taste curve to get used to spicy foods because I didn't grow up having it. I know a lot of black people have like hot sauce and stuff like that. We didn't have any of that.
So I have more hot sauce in the house than you do.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny because my family's from southern Italy, from Calabria. And the sort of demographic makeup of Italy is similar to the United States, where the northerners are the elites and the astute and the well-spoken and well-educated. And the southerners are, for lack of a better phrase, the hillbillies, the country folk. So Calabria is the foot of the boot.
Right.
It's like the toe and the ball of the foot, kind of going up the main peninsula. We used to always joke that we were the ones who kicked Sicily out of Italy because the boots there and then Sicily's there.
Right.
And that's where the hot food is in southern Italy. So there's Calabrian chili peppers and things like that. And we put crushed red pepper on almost everything. But as I've gotten older, I've kind of moved away from spice. My wife still eats the hell out of the stuff, but I still have kind of moved away from it a little. I love the way it tastes, but my body just doesn't deal with it like it used to. So I've just kind of moved away from that slowly. But I come from spicy food background. Not as spicy as like Hispanic Latin foods, but spicy for Italian food for sure.
That's interesting. That was one of the things I learned about Italy and that kind of like general description. I just got back from Italy a few weeks ago.
I remember seeing some of that.
Yeah. And just like talking to a couple of Italians or people, actually one Italian and one person who has been living in Italy, they're American, but they kind of generally described it in a similar sense that like even like a place like Rome, it's like things were a little bit backwards. Like it's a little bit different.
Yep.
So it's very interesting how how much like around the world we kind of have like a similar, like that region is a little bit different. Yeah.
And it's funny when you talk about that compared to our culture. And I'm not sure if this is where we wanted to go, but that particular part of my heritage kind of brings me almost credibility with people of color. Because I grew up in a neighborhood that was mixed Italian and Irish. And I actually hung around with more of the Irish guys. Like I hung around with a Sturrett, a Dunn, a Daly, an O'Connell, a Flanagan, an O'Shea. And the reason is I actually was Italian, and the Chicago Italians were fourth and fifth generation, and they were what I would call fake Italians. They were of Italian heritage, but they sort of held on to the wrong parts of the culture. They were more mafia Italians than Italy Italians,
right.
At least they were trying to be. And so I didn't really get along with them. Like one of the things, for example, you'll hear, and you hear this in New York and New Jersey too, so please don't take offense, but someone will say, oh, I like a nice bowl of gavadils. And I'm like, you mean cavatelli, which is what the pasta is really called.
Right.
But if you take dialect, Italian, which is what I spoke, and you just kind of mash it together, cavatelli becomes gavadelli or gavadils. And like my grandmother used to make the gavadils, you know what I'm talking about? And I'd be like, I don't know what you just said, because they weren't actually speaking it. But I digressed a little bit. My Irish friends made a point of letting me know constantly that I was Italian. It was constantly said to me. To this day, I still have friends, one specific friend I'm thinking of who I won't mention, and he is a friend, but he lives in Texas now. I live in Florida. We were friends in Chicago. I met him on the trading floor. And he calls me or texts me every once in a while. He's like, just thinking of you, I'm watching Goodfellas. So, You don't think of me when you're watching like Shawshank or when you're watching, you know, CSI.
Right.
Oh, I just saw Godfather 2. I just thought about you, you know. And it's a funny thing to me because I'm like, okay, I mean, I'm not offended by it, but I notice it, you know.
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's one of those things you never forget. Like, you can be around us, but remember you're different. You know, don't forget that. Yeah. You're making me think, have I experienced that? I think I have in some subtle ways. Because you're right, it's usually subtle. It's not like
It's very subtle. Yeah.
It's not too obvious.
And I mean, I want to be clear. Like, I don't consider them to have been racist or negative toward me at all.
Right.
They called me every weekend. We played basketball together. I was always included. They never made me feel different. It just was, you know, as I say that out loud, I guess they probably did make me feel different, but it wasn't in a negative way.
Right.
You know, I joke with my wife about this all the time. There's some comedian, I wish you could remember his name. As a matter of fact, I told myself I was going to look his name up because you were coming here, and I forgot to do it. But he was somebody who was fired from Saturday Night Live, canceled for some reason, and then let go from Saturday Night Live as a writer and an occasional cast member. And he had done something online. I don't know what it was. Obviously, as a joke, because he was a comedian.
Was it Shane Gillis?
Yes, it was Shane Gillis.
Okay.
Right? I'm a chubby Irish white guy. Well, he was doing some improv stand-up, and it's all over YouTube Shorts and things like that. And people were yelling stuff out, and somebody yelled Italians. And he goes, Italians? He goes, oh, Italian is the last race I can make fun of without getting canceled. He goes, I could be up here saying wop, guinea, dago, whatever, big nose, hook nose. He goes, nobody says anything to you. He goes, you can still make fun of Italians. He goes, but about 5 years from now, somebody's going to find this tape, and I'm going to lose whatever job I have at the time. You know, and I actually don't think that'll happen. And my wife pointed this out. She said the reason Italians don't get upset is they're so effing cocky that they think it's a compliment what we say about them, which I thought was hysterical. I thought that was really hysterical.
I'm trying to remember, what did Shane get canceled for? Like, I know he said something, but I can't remember what it was.
I can't remember.
No.
Well,
So I had a group of friends. I know exactly what you're describing, because I had a group of friends where I'd be around them, and then suddenly they'd want to tell me black jokes, and I'm like, first off, none of them are funny. Like, not saying like it's not funny because it's offensive. I like offensive jokes, but they just weren't funny. They just weren't good jokes, and because they weren't good jokes, then it made it more offensive than it actually should have been.
right. I mean, if Lisa, it's like, I've got a black joke. It's so funny, I got to tell Adam. But not just like I got to do it just to prove I can do it, or
Right.
I don't understand.
Right. So it was stuff like that I never really liked. And to be honest, the people who did it, they were like associates of friends. You know, you know how you have like a group, but you're only friends with a couple of people in the group. But you all know each other. It was that kind of thing.
It's like friends by association.
Friend by association, exactly. But I know that exact feeling. It's a weird place for me because I never hated being black or anything like that. I never hated my race. I grew up around all different types of people, but I just didn't care. You know, I didn't, like, it wasn't, like, for you, I understand. The Italian thing is, it's a place of birth, it's an origin, it's, you know, there's a history behind it, and then you move to a foreign nation. So it has like a greater significance. For me, like, I was born here.
Right.
I just happen to look different, right? And so I didn't want that to be like a thing. And I just wanted to have friends. I just wanted to be around other people. And I always hated when people made it a thing. I think that's why, like, the concept of colorblindness I like is because, like, if you like somebody, you like them. Like, it's just what it is. The differences between us is just like, you know, having a little bit of spice in this and no spice in that. I don't know. But it's not, doesn't mean anything. It's just slight differences between us. but like who we are as people and character and all these different things. Like that's the substance of human beings. And I always hated when someone forced it upon me.
Yeah.
Like I've had other black people say, "Never forget that you are black." Like it's it's like, yes, I won't forget that I'm black. But I know what they mean. They're trying to institute some sort of if you don't approach everything from the perspective of you are different, then you're a fool, right? Because everybody sees that and they're treating you accordingly. That's what they're implying. So anything that happens to me in life, it's because you are black. So if it's negative, it's because you're black. If it's positive, well, it may not be because you're black. Actually, there's the whole black excellence, right? If you achieve something, that's because of black excellence. Yes, yes. If you fail, it's because they're holding you down, right? So I've always just hated that identity aspect where it's like never forget you're different. And it's like,
so it's one of the things I always admired about you from the first time I started following you and reading your stuff on the New York Post. And you seem to, and correct me if I'm wrong in the way that I've worded this, you seem to have this natural attitude of, I know I'm black, I just don't care. That is the way it always came across to me. You know, and in essence, from my perspective, then it becomes, yeah, you know I'm black too, but you shouldn't care. Because I don't care. So why would you care?
Right.
And that was sort of the way that like I was drawn to you as a creator, as a content creator, and to read your stuff and just read more and more your takes on things. I watched Coleman Hughes' TED Talk on colorblindness.
I didn't get a chance to watch it.
Okay, I thought it was great. So one of the things he did, and again, full credit to him on this, he's somebody else similar to you that I follow, who I just think is reasonable.
Right.
You know? He said, I want to do a thought exercise to the crowd at TED. And he said, everybody close their eyes. Now think of a close friend. Now think of why that person is a friend of yours. Think of what's a reason that you want to be friends, right? And he said, now open your eyes. And he goes, how many of you said because your friend is tall? How many of you said because your friend is bald? How many of you said because your friend is black or white or Hispanic? He said, that's colorblindness. He goes, now I'm willing to guess, some of you, your friend was black, some of you, your friend was Mexican, some of your friend was tall, but that wasn't what you thought about. And it brings me to what you said about like, you notice people that are different from you. And in my opinion, you have to get to the point where you notice it and it's almost like, and tall is the best example. So when I was on the trading floor, there were these two guys, Brett and Tim. And Brett played basketball at DePaul. He was 6'11". And Tim played football, I think at Wisconsin, and he was like 6'9". And I'm 5'9". And I got on the elevator in between them. And I looked up at him, and I literally said, I don't believe we're the same species. I don't. I think we have different DNA. I look like your 10-year-old child. And it was a joke, and it was about them physically. And I guarantee you, 5 times out of 7 days in a week, somebody mentions their height to them.
Yeah.
And they're probably sick of it. Nothing they could do about it. They didn't choose it, but they stand out. They're both white, by the way. They stand out because of a physical trait. So now it's gotten to the point of sensitivity where I say to myself, if I see somebody tall, should I not mention they're tall? One of my best friends down here in Southwest Florida is 6'4". Again, when you're 5'9", that's a really tall person. Right. You know, and every once in a while I'm like, Jesus, Chris, you're so big. And I don't mean it as to other him, as people say. It just stands out to me. It's almost jealousy. No, it is jealousy. It's not almost jealousy. It's total jealousy, right? And I wonder if maybe that's the difference. Like tall people know that it's jealousy. I don't know. But as an Italian who gets pointed out that he's Italian constantly, I take it as jealousy. I really do. Because it's a really good thing to be Italian, by the way.
I heard.
Yeah, it really is. It's great. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I can understand that. Getting tired of someone constantly mentioning it to you. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm working this stuff out.
No. This is part of the thought experiment. It's to consider these things. I guess what you did when you were on the elevator, that's what I would call addressing the elephant in the room, right?
Literally with those two guys.
Yeah. And I have no problem with that. You know, it's sometimes it's an icebreaker. That's why I like comedy. I've always been a comedy fan. My mom got me into comedy. First time I went to a comedy club, my mom brought me. And I always like comedy, especially offensive comedy. You know, if it's offensive comedy is good when it's done really well, right? If it's bad, it's just offensive.
So you're talking about like Bill Burr versus like Michael Richards. Michael Richards from Seinfeld was
Right.
he's not even funny as a stand-up comic.
Right. That I
Bill
know
Burr makes everybody mad while they're laughing their asses off.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I get it.
That kind of thing. Even like someone like Anthony Jeselnik, who's purposefully offensive, but he's really good at it, and it's funny, right? And you know it's coming, you know. So it's like bracing for impact. Oh, it's about to happen, and it's funny. Even my friend Chrissy Mayer, you know, she does some offensive humor. Like most of it's offensive humor, but it's good. She's a good comedian. And so all of that is with like ingest. It's like addressing the elephant in the room. Like, yeah, you look different. I'm going to make a joke and we're all going to laugh and then we're all going to move on with our lives. I'm going to make fun of you. I'm going to make fun of you. And we'll just address the elephant in the room. We all look different, right?
And on that note, I expected back if I do that, what Brett and Tim did, because after I said I'm like your 10-year-old child or whatever age I used, Brett put his hand out and grabbed my hand and Tim patted me on the head. And it was hysterical to me. It was absolutely, I still tell that story to a lot of people. You know, they're basically like, yeah, little man, you're little. That's what it is. And I am. It's fine. You know, it's never bothered me that much. But I get what you're saying. And do you mind if I ask you a question?
Go for it.
So you mentioned how my family came from a foreign country and, you know, so I never understood the concept of appropriation, cultural appropriation. I never understood it. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite Italian restaurants, my favorite Italian restaurant in Chicago, is owned by two Jewish guys. A black female that I knew who worked in a restaurant near the Board of Trade that I became friends with was constantly cooking Italian food. None of that ever bothered me. As a matter of fact, I would go to this restaurant all the time, you know, and they would make an Italian joke and I would make a Jewish joke and then we would eat together. I had a neighbor when I lived in Pilsen in Chicago. Pilsen is a 80% Hispanic neighborhood in Chicago. Literally the first language in that neighborhood is Spanish. And we lived in there as our last home in Chicago. And we loved it there, by the way. It's a fantastic place to live. And I mentioned the setup to you before we started filming. We had a coach house and there were 2 units in front. And in the unit in front was a black guy from Detroit, Nick Robinson. And I don't think he might have said his name. And his girl who was from El Salvador, and they had a baby. And in the front house was her brother and his live-in boyfriend. And it was kind of an oddly, my wife is German Czech descendant or German Croatian, I think. She's white. She's redheaded, blue-eyed. So it was a really diverse lot, you know. And Nick became one of my closest friends in that period of my life. He's from Detroit, grew up in a boys' home. Wildly successful guy in the business world, though. He went to Michigan, got his degree, came to Chicago, worked his way up. He's within inches of being a partner at a huge firm. He might be one already at this point. And we used to get drunk and have philosophical conversations at 5 a.m.
Right.
It was all BS joking before that, and then we would get a few drinks in us and have these conversations. And one time I posited this to him. I said, I don't understand cultural. I don't get it. Like, I see it as a compliment as an Italian. When somebody does Italian stuff, tries to learn to speak Italian, wears Italian clothes, drives Italian cars, I see it as a compliment. And he goes, you have a country to go to. He goes, I don't. He goes, I'm from here. So my culture was made where I grew up. He goes, and it's the only thing theoretically we have. And I said, okay, I don't have an argument for that. I really don't. But there are 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th generation Italians and 12th generation Irish here, and they don't really have one either. And I said that to him, and he said, no, but they can still go back to their country. He goes, I have no clue what country in Africa my family's from, or even if they are. They may not be from Africa. Mm-hmm. He goes, they could be Western Indian, or he goes, I don't know where I'm from that far back. And I thought about it, and I said, okay, I get that. That makes sense to me. But I still don't understand why it's not a compliment. And then I started wondering, is it on the basis of white people stealing music back in the day and not paying the writers and the artists? And I don't know where it comes from. Do you have any insight on that? I'm trying to learn, by the way. I'm not.
No. I'm not sure about the origin. Honestly, the first time I heard cultural appropriation was actually relatively recently, with probably like in 2020, with all these leftists injecting all the nonsense. I think human beings take what they like. Across the world, throughout human history, they take what they like. Mm-hmm. Even from the aspect of, you mentioned, them using another black artist's sound or song, right, and not paying them and giving it to someone else. In a weird kind of way, they took what they like. Some people do it with permission. Some people just adapt to it. Some people, but human beings have always taken what they like.
Right.
But at the end of the day, they like it. And you have no control over that. So we'll talk like soul food, right? We create soul food. Well, there's no restriction on food.
Right.
Like, even I know there was some origins as far as even some Italian dishes where it's like, well, it started because they got this ingredient from a different country. Right. And that's how we started to create this dish. So humans have always taken what they like from just about everywhere for everything. Right. Spices from India, and you start this Indian trade, so you have all these different things. So I always try to look at things from a wider context. I understand where he's coming from. I'm not saying that he's wrong. I understand where he's coming from, but that's a very personal framing. And what I'm trying to do is have like a very impersonal framing. One that's like, it's removed of feelings for me. So I'm just describing it as a general, like, I didn't even say black. I'm just saying human beings. This is the thing that human beings do. I think often what happens is we personalize things and we think it only happens to them. Right. Right. And it's like, no, like, great things and horrible things happen to all different types of people around the world. Today, throughout human history, it's part of the human condition. And I think when we don't make it so personal, then we can find some sort of acceptance that this is what it is. Right? And you have no control over that. Like, if every black person felt the way that he did, that's well within their right. But they have zero control over that. And the Chinese guy could open up a soul food restaurant tomorrow and create great soul food, right, and everybody comes in there and buys it and they like it. Right. They have no control over it. It is something that is inevitable. And I think ultimately having part of your culture exported is something extremely beneficial. Ultimately. Hopefully it's good things that are exported and not bad things that are exported, but I think it's a good thing, honestly. Now, with that being said, I think oftentimes we pick and choose what's cultural appropriation and what isn't, right? So we know that hip hop is the #1 genre in the country. Right. But do we think that 100%, 90%, or 80% of the sales for hip hop music is from Black people only? No. It's from
Some of
all
it's from
different
me.
types. Right. It's from all different types of people. That is a cultural export, so to speak. So, but Black people benefit from it, who are in the record industry, or the artists, they benefit from it. Like, so that is a relatively net positive. We can have questions about the type of music and the quality of it and the message from it, but it's an export. So I don't know. It's complicated. I'm not trying to minimize what your friend is saying. I understand where it comes from, and I think it's good to. One, I think it's great that you're asking a genuine question. And you asked him a genuine question. My problem is when we're told we're not allowed to ask these questions, right? You're just supposed to shut up and accept what he said. And it's like, you're trying to come to some sort of understanding, right? Because we're different people.
Right.
We have different experiences and come from different places. And we're trying to understand why that makes sense for you. And you're trying to wrap your head around why that's the case, because you're coming from a different place. You're coming from a different perspective. And it's the people who are saying, no, you're not even allowed to do that. Just shut up and accept what they say. Listen to Black voices, right? So like if I say something now and you're allowed to say, because you're a grown man and we live in a free country, you're allowed to say, but how does that make sense because X, Y, and Z? Like that's how conversations happen. That's how we learn. And maybe I say something and it doesn't make any sense. And it was the first time I'm verbalizing. I'm like, yeah, actually, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm walking around thinking this. It doesn't make sense. No one ever challenged me. And I think it's a dangerous precedence to say that there are groups of people that you're not allowed to ask questions about. You're just supposed to take what they say as face value and never be inquisitive about, one, if it makes sense, or trying to just wrap your head around, how they came to that conclusion. Why is that the case?
What I'm taking from what you said in combination with the answer I got from Nick, well, two things. First of all, where does the appropriation stop? In other words, there's a couple of places down here in Southwest Florida that make some pretty accurate, authentic Chicago food. Are they appropriating it because this is in Chicago? Right. You can go to certain towns in Italy and it's the origin of something. For example, Neapolitan style pizza obviously is from Naples. And if you had it there, it's fantastic, right? It's out of this world. And you may come across one or two places, especially on the East Coast, that does it right. And you're like, this reminds me of the pizza in Italy. And the guy there is probably fourth generation or fifth generation. He may not be Italian at all. So can they make Neapolitan style pizza in Calabria, where I'm from, right? Can you make spicy Italian sausage, which comes from Calabria in the north? How small do you shrink down the definition of appropriation? And so I can understand where he comes from when he says that, but I'm going to start as I think about it going forward, I'm going to start adding in what you said is people take what they like, therefore it is a compliment because they like it. Right. So they're doing it because they like what you do. It's a form of admiration, in my view. It's not an insult. And when somebody says, how dare you like what I'm doing? Your initial reaction as a human being is to recoil and be like, fine, then fuck, I don't like you at all. Right. It's not to, sorry, I don't know if we're cussing in this, but no, it's not your initial feeling as a human, and especially as an American, is not to turn around and go, oh, I'm sorry, how can I learn then? If someone comes at me aggressively, my initial reaction is to be like on guard and then on the offensive to try and stop the aggression. Right. And the older I get, the less I try and do that, but it happens. And the division we're living through right now is something I can't believe it. I'm old enough to have had conversations with people around. I was born in 1966. So I'm old enough to have had conversations with people who remember when it was really bad. And some of them say this is in some ways worse, what's going on, left and right, black and white, however you want to split it up. Right. Straight and not straight. It's just, I don't understand it. And it's part of the reason we moved down here. Is because I don't have to confront it on a regular basis. And it's not because I had a friend who lives in New York, and him and his wife ask me every once in a while, it's not really diverse where you live, is it? Yeah, it's actually quite diverse. Maybe not where I live in my development here, but at the restaurant I go to, at the bar that I go to, at the supermarket that I go to, at the supermercado I go to for tacos, which reminds me of Pilsen. You know, it's very diverse. Just nobody talks about it. Nobody bothers you. Everybody just kind of lives their lives, and nobody gets in each other's way, and there's no confrontations, and there's no immediate suggestion of offense anytime something happens.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's why I'm here.
So I think part of it is, I think there's a class element to much of the dialogue between clashes between people, and the media stokes a lot of it.
Yeah. Now you're getting onto a subject I like.
Yeah, I think the media is definitely driving it for multiple reasons. It makes a lot of money, right? Scared people pay more attention to the news. You know, fear is a great motivator, and it's a great moneymaker. And if you make people believe that the world around you is changing and everybody's at odds, right? And you show like the riots happening here, and you're like, oh my God, those riots are happening there and they're coming here, and what are we going to do? Like, the world is ending. And it's like, you know, if you play that over and over, and put it on a loop, human beings become demoralized. And I think that's what's starting to happen. Like, one of the reasons I even started writing was because of after George Floyd. And I wasn't on social media like that. I didn't even use Twitter or anything like that. I just kept to myself. And I had a Facebook for family, but I would notice it was like every family member, or I'm saying every family member, but like every Black person who was a friend of mine on Facebook, it was like they were having a panic attack. And I've experienced panic attacks, and I know what that feels like. And I'm watching, and I'm seeing, like, it's the irrational response to everything. Like, the sky is falling. Oh my God, a cop is going to kill me tomorrow. Like, it's just highly irrational, and I'm calm. And so when someone's having a panic attack, they can't realize that they're the only one having it, and that the world is actually sitting still and they're going crazy. But that's what it felt like. I felt like I was still and calm, and I'm looking at the news, and I'm like, that's unfortunate. And then I'm looking, I'm like, everybody's freaking out. That's what it felt like. Everyone is freaking out. And I couldn't understand why. Like, I'm looking at people who are economically privileged, professional people, live great lives, turn around and say they're oppressed. And I was just like, how does this make any sense? Right? It's like they forgot everything, like their entire lives. Grown adults, they just forgot their entire lives until George Floyd was killed. That guy you don't know that lives thousands of miles away. And then suddenly your life is not what your life has actually been. And I thought there's something wrong with that, right? Especially when it felt like I'm not allowed to talk about it. And that's what made me want to talk about it. Because not having the choice not to speak, I chose not to speak. But when it felt like someone said, you can't, that's when I felt like I need to say something. I need to see, like, am I the only one? Why can't I say these things? That's what it felt like. Right. But a lot of it just felt like it was media driven, and then the politicians come into play, and then the progressive socialist types were waiting to, boom, inject all the crazy stuff. Because I had been watching the culture war stuff, but all that stuff was seemingly happening in the colleges, right? So it was this crazy pink hair kids and doing all types of crazy stuff. But like, it wasn't until I saw the George Floyd situation, it was like the crazy stuff that happened in college just hit the streets. Right. and then it went into corporate America. And then it just went everywhere. This is like this mind virus that just spread it everywhere. So,
The corporate part's one of the funniest parts to me.
yeah.
The idea that Coca-Cola or British Petroleum or, I don't care, pick one, gives a
Disney.
shit about what your political views are. They are literally chameleons and they don't care. Whatever will sell more product. And when you put pressure on a company to do this, it's like they're laughing at you. When you're putting pressure on them to take a political stance, they're laughing at you, in my view. And I've been in some of these meetings back in the day, not necessarily corporate meetings, but meetings where we had to make decisions at a firm I was at. And every single decision is based on the same thing. And the stance to me seems to be now conservatives will figure it out, but leftists will boycott. So let's just go with their because that's our bottom line. This way we'll still sell to everybody. Well, Michael Jordan famously said Republicans buy sneakers too, right? Back in the day when they asked him why he wasn't political.
Right.
I don't understand why any corporation is political.
Me either.
Because as a conservative, you generally would think, all right, fine, that's their stance. They still have the least expensive product for the quality, so I'll still buy it, but that's their stance, whatever.
Right.
Somebody asked me recently if I was a part of not the Bud Light boycott, but a different one. I never drank Bud Light anyway, so it was very easy to be a part of that boycott, but I think it was a Target one.
Okay.
And yeah, it was the Target one specifically. And this was actually on a TV interview on a financial station. And I said, I don't really believe in boycotts. I said, but I will say that if I walk into a Target and something makes me uncomfortable, I will probably walk out. I won't publicize it. I won't take a picture of it. I won't try to recruit other people. I will just walk out because individual freedoms is what I'm theoretically about. So I'm not going to turn to you. I told you when you first got here that my wife and I had started what is likely a temporary stint, but maybe a lifelong stint of eating just pure carnivore. And we feel great. We look better. I couldn't be happier. My mind is clear. But I'm not trying to get anyone else to do it, ever. If a friend of mine says, you look good, what are you doing? I tell them. And if they ask more, I tell them. But I'm not going to become a carnivore influencer by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
Because I don't care what other people do at all. As long as they're outside of my house, I could care less.
Right.
I don't care if my neighbor paints his house pink. This kind of a community, you can't do that, but that's not why I live here. So it was funny to me, the overall view, the media itself. To me, it's like the media and insurance companies are the two worst entities that exist in capitalist America. They're horrible. They're horrible. Now, to me, the insurance companies, and I'm open to anyone explaining to me why I'm wrong, because I might be, and I'm perfectly open to that. But any sort of baseline investigation that I'm able to do always comes down to insurance companies reject certain things that your doctor wants to do. Therefore, your doctor tries to charge more for other things, knowing that your insurer is going to reject one of the things they feel they need to find out what's wrong with you. So they try to make it up. I'm going to give you a free steak, but I'm going to charge you $100 for that soda. That's what they do.
Right.
Right? And why an insurance company would, I mean, I know why. Insurance companies, they're the only business on the planet that has to have cash. They have to have it on hand.
Right.
We're speaking here a year after Hurricane Ian, almost a year to the day. It's about a year and a week, something like that. Billions of dollars the insurance companies had to pay off. And they're still fighting with people saying, you don't deserve this money even though you paid us. That's the evil part. Like, I understand they have to charge a lot. I understand that they have to keep a cash hoard. But if they manage their cash incorrectly and they don't have enough when the time comes, your problem. But they just immediately reject everyone in the hurricane zone. We don't believe your claim. And they make you fight them for every single penny. It's just evil to me. And then the media, you know, you mentioned it makes money, it drives clicks, it drives views, whatever it needs to be. How horrible is that versus what the media was supposed to be 50, 100 years ago? What it was actually supposed to be. There was a show on when I was a little kid. I'm a lot older than you, I think, but it was called Hugh Grant. Mm-hmm. And it was modeled after the Mary Tyler Moore Show was a sitcom that was in a newsroom. And the editor of the newspaper was Hugh Grant. It was a comedy. Well, then they made a serious nightly drama called Hugh Grant. And he was the editor of a real paper, and it wasn't a comedy. It was a fantastic show. Right. And their reporters on the show were these grizzled guys that didn't make a lot of money. They drank a lot, but they were really smart. They wore rumpled suits. They would go into, run down buildings and fight drug dealers to get the story and all this stuff. There's nobody like that now. How many makeup people do you think Jake Tapper has? It's just like they're celebrities now. They're not journalists in the sense of the old journalist. And these big, and by the way, it's both of them. I'm not a fan of Sean Hannity. I'm not a fan of Fox. Mm-hmm. I watch all of them because I feel it's the only way to prepare for my day, my work day. Mm-hmm. And I figure the true story is always somewhere in between MSNBC and Fox, right, or CNN and Fox. But I get most of my news from guys like you now. I really do. Because the first thing I open now is Twitter. And I'm not saying Twitter's 100% reliable, but at least I know what to start investigating. Right. Because you don't get unbiased views from media because that's not what they're about anymore. And it's disgusting to me. It really is. I can't stand watching it.
As I have to say this now, as someone who is part of the media, mm-hmm. I'm a big proponent for independent media. I like independent media because it's more honest in its biases. So I know if I watch the Young Turks, mm-hmm. I know that they're a leftist, progressive organization, mm-hmm. and I know what I'm getting.
Agreed.
Right?
I watch them sometimes.
I tried. I can't.
I like Anna Kasparian. I think she's at least genuine. Cenk I don't like so much.
Yeah, Cenk's not likable.
He's not genuine.
No.
He's playing a character.
Yeah.
But Anna, I think, actually has some, well, anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. But if I listen to Ben Shapiro, I understand Ben Shapiro is conservative, right? Mm-hmm. The Daily Wire is a conservative network. So at least from that standpoint, they're showing me their hand. Mm-hmm. My issue is more so that if I turn on CNN, if I turn on, MSNBC and at times Fox, mm-hmm. they pretend that they aren't.
Right.
They pretend that they are completely objective, and we have no biases, and we're just telling it how it is, and these are the facts. And I was like, quite clearly, you guys aren't. Mm-hmm. You're not. I've seen stuff where, even down to what stories they pick to talk about, mm-hmm. those are important. Fox News talks about certain stories, and MSNBC will not talk about those stories. They'll talk about something else completely. And I was like, isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm.
Literally the headline stories. The Fox headline story won't appear on the MSNBC broadcast at all.
Right.
And vice versa.
Yeah. Unless it's something that's huge, like George Floyd.
Right.
Right. But then with that, they'll have a different angle mm-hmm. as to what significant those. MSNBC will bring on these leftist professors who will talk about white supremacy for an hour. And then Fox News will bring on cops who will say, we're under attack. Right, right. It'll just be, and they're not, in my opinion, they're not honest. Mm-hmm. Whereas something like Daily Wire, whether I agree with them or not, and I don't agree with them on everything mm-hmm. or anything like that, but at least they say we are a conservative news network or mm-hmm. we're a conservative outlet. They at least tell you, we're showing you up front what we are. Right. It's very obvious what we are. So understand our perspective is coming from this lean. Mm-hmm. And so you're at least like, okay, let me hear what the conservatives are saying and how they're seeing it. Does that make sense? And then you can read something, you're like, all right, well, that sounds a little bit off. Let me go here. Oh, we are a liberal outlet. Mm. We're a leftist outlet. And here's our perspective. So at least you get that. I just hate when they pretend that they aren't.
Right.
Right? Like we know, obviously you watch both and you see the differences in the dynamics. And actually, since you do watch both, because not a lot of people do, one thing you've probably seen this. They'll use, in different stories, they'll use the same arguments, but just switch the noun. And it's so hilarious to me. As someone who I used to watch mainstream media all the time. I was a Democrat who never heard the other side. Yeah. I heard the filtered version through a left-wing the left-wing filter as to what Republicans and conservatives wanted, right? But I dissected the arguments that they made. And so then when I started listening to right-wing media, over a period of time, you're like, oh, you guys do realize they say the same thing, just reverse the word. Like, Democrats say we want to save democracy. Republicans say we need to save the nation. It's like, it's the same narrative, guys. And that's where, when people say it's the uniparty, so to speak, I was like, that part is more accurate than people really believe. And I'm just like, you guys are being manipulated, completely manipulated. That's why I don't tweet too much these days. I don't know if you've noticed. But
I have noticed.
I don't tweet too much these days because my responses to things is often because they want me to respond to these things. Like, there's a million things that happen in America, right? It's a huge nation. It was over 300 million people. All types of scenarios that happen, yet there will be 5 stories that happen in a given week, 5 main stories that happen in a given week. Why those stories, right? And then you have the political leans that want to divide those 5 and really focus on the 2 things here and the 3 things here. But why are they choosing those, right? Because they want you to have some sort of response to it. They want you to be angry. Like, for example, on the right, they love to show the looting videos. It's like, okay, that's not good. Right. However, why? Why are you always showing the looting videos? And then I would notice they would show looting videos from 3 years ago. It's like, why are they circulating 3-year-old videos? Right. And it just started making sense. They just want, it's all good. Almost fell. They just want outrage. Yeah. They just want people emotional, angry. They want them to think that the world is over. And this is even beyond algorithms, right? This is specific larger accounts do these things. And the funniest are when they drudge up like 2-3-year-old videos to circulate it. And for the people who aren't aware that this is a 2-3-year-old video, they're like, oh, I can't believe it, right? And I'm just like, guys, they're manipulating you. Yeah. This entire ecosystem is about manipulation. It's about getting a response from people. Now there's the financial incentive on Twitter, so it's amped up a bit as far as really getting a reaction from people, really getting engagement, because now they for sure make money off of doing that. And I'm not opposed to people making money, but I just don't want to be part of the game when it comes to that. I want to talk about stuff that actually matters, right? Because when the store gets looted in Philadelphia, it doesn't affect the influencer sharing the video. It doesn't affect 99.9% of the people who are complaining about it. They don't live there, right? And they don't give a shit about the people who are actually affected now that their store that they attended is gotten looted by opportunists who may not even be from Philadelphia or from that particular area of Philadelphia. So that's why I'm like, I just don't give a shit.
It's funny, I've been wondering lately what it is about Philadelphia that now they're focused on Philadelphia, because Chicago was the focus for a long time. And I'm actually, I think sort of like you in that way. When I see something, I'm like, why this and why now? Not necessarily from the story level, but why Philadelphia all of a sudden? Why is every single story I see now somebody getting beat up in Philadelphia, somebody getting shot in broad daylight in Philadelphia? You know, and then I still look at Chicago news, and it's like 5 shot this weekend, 3 of them dead. Like, well, that's the same story. Why? And I haven't figured it out yet. But I feel like at some point, I think in Chicago was literally about Lori Lightfoot, where Chicago got such an explosion of the news coverage. Yes, it was a dangerous place to live, and it still is. But once Lori Lightfoot was gone, now Brandon Johnson is in, who couldn't be less traditional capitalist, traditional conservative. He's the farthest thing from it. But they're not as focused on him. And they're not as focused on Chicago. And I'm like, okay, what election is coming up there? Is it the state of Pennsylvania? They're trying to swing one way or the other. What is it?
Yeah. Brandon, speaking of Chicago,
Yeah.
he is what I classify as Charmin soft.
Charmin soft. I got to hear this one. That's why I wish you still tweeted.
I know he worked in education. He reminds me of the cool teacher, right? Or the want-to-be cool teacher.
Yeah.
He's like, I understand what's going on. Why don't you come to my office after class
We'll smoke
and we'll
some
talk
weed.
about it, right? That's what he seems like. The greatest example, and I truly believe like no real man would say something like this. When there was, and I was about to say like, you remember that one? It's been multiple, but when a whole bunch of teens went into the downtown area and started mobbing and stuff
What
like
they
that.
call a
fights.
teen takeover now.
Right, teen takeover.
So innocent.
So when the news media in Chicago says mob, he gets offended. And what's hilarious is he pretends that definition doesn't have multiple definitions as far as what mob means. He's like, this is not organized crime. He's like, this was a large gathering. This was not a large gathering.
No.
Mob has a very particular term.
It has a definition.
It has a definition. Like, and he wanted to minimize the language, right? For people, granted, most of them are probably young or maybe under age of 18, but they cause adult-like chaos. Like,
Right.
so yes, we get to criticize them and we get to chastise them for doing crazy shit. And so yes, it is mob-like activity when they organized. They didn't just like, it wasn't like 400 teens just happened to show up. It was somewhat organized.
Yeah,
to
through social media.
Through social media. So
Yeah.
yes, it was organized crime, technically.
Oh, that's great. I never even thought of that. You know, it's funny with these, so the changing of words like that, where words become negative when they're really just words with definitions.
Right.
That's something that drives me crazy too. Like I mentioned the other day to a friend of mine, I'm like, when did illegal aliens become undocumented immigrants become migrants?
Right.
Where they just kind of soften the language all the way around. All of those are true. All three of them are true. And I remember Fox always used criminal illegal aliens, and MSNBC always used undocumented workers, and now the leftists started with migrants. Again, all of them are true. But it cracked me up because a really, really close friend of mine, somebody I consider to be a brother, is the child of an illegal immigrant. And he gets very upset at that kind of stuff. And I'm the child of legal immigrants, right? And I said, look, I love your parents, right? I love them to death. I'm glad they're here because now you're here and I love you too. But he doesn't get why it was okay for my parents to come and illegal for his. And I said, the reason is because they broke a law and my parents didn't. I said, look, I have a friend with a DUI. He's a criminal. He's got a DUI conviction. When you commit a crime, you become a criminal. I have been a criminal in the past. You know, I've broken laws. You know, and these particular laws, I mean, do I live the rest of my life as a criminal? I don't think so. But when you cross the border, the first act you've taken is to break a law. It's the very first thing you've done. And I don't blame people for wanting to come here. My
Right.
parents came here, and they told me why. And it seemed like a pretty good reason. You know, they wanted a better future. There was nothing in southern Italy for them.
Right.
Just nothing. My mother didn't have indoor plumbing until she was 16. And she didn't have electricity until she was 13 in the house she lived in the mountains in Italy. I mean, my mother is a story, dude. I mean, I'm telling you, First of all, she's 4 foot nothing. She's the smallest woman, probably that they don't classify as a little person. She took care of she was the oldest. She took care of her 2 brothers and her sisters when she was a young, not even a teenager, 12, 11 years old, while both parents did what they had to do to bring money home. And they lived in literally a 1-room shack. You know, it's a famous line from one of my favorite Biggie Smalls songs, but it was literally a 1-room shack. And she remembers when they pulled electricity to the house. They were sharecroppers. My grandmother worked the land of the owner who owned the house and the 1-room shack. And they were allowed to keep 20% of the crop. They didn't get paid. They got to live in the house for nothing. And they got to keep some of the crop, and the rest went to the owner of the land. And she remembers looking out of the window, watching this child of the owner of the house eat a Nutella sandwich. You're familiar with Nutella?
Yeah.
Well, when I would eat that when I was a little kid in Chicago, all my friends would be like, ew, you're putting chocolate on bread. Because it wasn't in stores. It was in Italian stores, but it wasn't anywhere else.
Right.
My mother remembers watching this little kid in his window eating a Nutella sandwich. And she said she would cry. She wanted it so bad, but they couldn't afford it. And before my father passed away, she lived in a 5-bedroom house with a 3-car garage. And she drove a little Mercedes, smallest one you could get, cheapest one you could get, but still.
Right.
For her, it's a much bigger jump than somebody like me. And it's comparable to the jump of a Nick Robinson who grew up in a boys' home in Detroit to becoming to where he is.
Right.
And the comparables are right there. And if they got in a room together and told stories, they'd be almost the same stories, just with different environments, different backdrops, you know? And I completely digressed from the meaning of words, but my mother gets very confused by when they change words, you know, and they change the meanings of them. Because English is her second language, although she speaks English perfectly. My father had a thick accent, but my mother did not. She learned it perfect English when she went to grade school here. And she gets completely confused by all the changing narratives because things were one way before and they're not later. I'll tell you a quick story about her if I could.
Yeah.
I don't think she'd be mad if I told the story. When they came to Italy, came to the U.S., she was 16. And her mother had gotten a job in a factory on the west side of Chicago, the Westinghouse, I think it was. And her father had already been here a couple of years, and he dug most of the sewers in Chicago and the surrounding suburbs. He would literally go down with a shovel and dig ditches to put sewers in. He was buried alive twice, and they got him out both times.
Jesus Christ.
Crazy stuff, right? And her mother, they literally landed Ellis Island on a ship, came to Chicago from New York. My mother literally was on the boat. She's right off the boat. My father took a plane. But anyway, comes to Chicago. Her mother starts work the next day, right? My grandmother. And my grandmother says, find school, and leaves. Go to school, find where it is. And she's 16, has seen 2 cars in her life. And she's on the west side of Chicago. Oddly enough, about 12 blocks from my last house in Chicago was where she was. And so she went out and she put on her best clothes, which made her look like an immigrant, right? And she walked around and she found a bus stop. And for some reason, the picture of the bus made her realize it was a bus. So she had heard there were school buses. And so she decided, I'm just going to get on a bus. And a young black girl came up to her and said something to her. And my mother didn't know what she said. And the girl slapped her in the face and walked away. And my mother said, she still doesn't remember what she said because she didn't speak English at the time, so it didn't register. And she said she was afraid of black people for the longest time because her first experience with an African American was to get slapped in the face by one. She has no idea why. She said, maybe I upset her. I don't know why. Maybe I was standing in her spot. Maybe I was blocking the sign. I don't know. She goes, I have no idea why. And she came to be completely open to people through friends of mine that I would bring to the house, you know, of multi-races. And it was that learning experience. These guys would come up to her my Mexican friend, my black friend, my Asian friend, they would all come up to her, they'd give her hugs, they'd eat her food, they'd compliment her, and all that fear went away, just like that. We don't have that now. Instead, we have these combative conversations. You don't understand me, I don't understand you, fine, I won't try anymore, fine, neither will I.
Yeah.
And it stops. And that's where I'm grateful to know someone like you, I really am, because
Likewise.
you bridge gaps.
Yeah, I think I'm ultimately trying to.
Here, want me to throw that over there?
Ah, thank you.
Well,
by the way, the steak was delicious.
I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, I like we said before, I don't really eat steak, but that was good.
It's one of the only things we eat now, so we had to get decent at making.
It's one of those things where even in my book, Black Victim, Black Victor, I talk about at times black, and then at times is very general because it can fit for anybody. But I think I ended up writing it as like a case study because anybody can read it and you're like, actually, that sounds like such and such I know, and they're not black. I have people from other countries who've read the book and are like, that sounds like my people, like that type of behavior sounds like my family. They see themselves because it's a very human kind of experience.
Right.
And at the end, I have the 9 solution chapters, and I talk about, you mentioned your mom, but I talk about my great aunt who welcomed everybody into the house, everybody.
I love those people.
And she always laughed, she always smiled, and you respected her. Her best friends, or I believe like her best friend, but like a really great family friend was a neighbor. She's Jewish, I think of Hungarian descent. And she would come over all the time, every holiday. She would be there. Oh, hey, Adam, how's your son? Even to this day. She had passed away a number of years ago. But she still comes over. She's a family friend. And she's a neighbor. She's right down the street. She's part of the community. And it's that kind of thing that, like, I want more people to be like my great aunt. Right, who says, yeah, you look different, but like I don't care. Like I like you, and okay, that's it.
Hey, I mean, we're just social media friends, and I don't know you except from talking online, and you're in my house.
Yeah.
So it's just like there's no fear because your character comes through.
Right.
And the thing about it to me is, back to changing words, and this is honestly another question. I want your opinion on this.
Sure.
I struggle with stupid versus nefarious. I struggle with that all the time. Because obviously when they change the meaning of words, it's for a reason. It's for a specific reason. By the way, the whole bias and capture is also in financial news media. And it's horrible for people. I mean, it's another reason independent financial news media, which I guess is something that I'm becoming part of, is going to be the next wave of valuable independent media in my view. Because the major ones specifically. So there's Bloomberg News, right?
Right.
And on Bloomberg News is a story about Michael Bloomberg donating another $500 million, allocating another $500 million to get rid of coal plants permanently in the U.S., hurting hundreds, if not thousands, of families in the process.
Right.
And they put that up there as the small chyrons below it, how great he is and what a wonderful step that is and everything. And he's not getting rid of coal plants and giving that $500 million to the thousands of families that are going to lose their homes and their jobs because of it. The major financial network, I used to do a lot of work for them. And I told them to go away in not so nice terms, to never schedule me again, because they wanted me to do something like, they wanted me to talk about something that I thought was irresponsible to talk about. And when I didn't, they yelled at me afterwards. And I said, you guys, don't call me anymore. Like, don't have me on. Because there is zero reason I want to talk the way you tried to get me to talk. They would say something in my ear whenever there was 2 of us. They'd yell, we want to argue this point. And I wouldn't argue because the guy was right, in my opinion. And then afterwards, they're like, Bobby, when we say we want to argue, we want you to bring up the counterpoint. I'm like, he was fucking right. Why would I argue with him?
Right.
You know, just so you guys could have a conflict on air. I don't have any interest in that.
Right.
You know, so it's the same thing. But back to the original question, how do you tell the difference between what is deliberate and what is just outright stupidity in politics and journalism, whichever?
So I tend to lean on, I guess it depends who, right? So if you're talking about politicians, I tend to think that most politicians are reactionary, right? They're not very forward thinking. They have to think about this election, what's happening now, and they react, right? Really good politicians strategize, but not many of them strategize. They don't really play chess. They're usually checkers players. So they think in the moment and they just react to the moment and say, yes, we should do those things. Yes, of course, right? Because they see the change in culture. I use the example of Joe Biden saying, yes, we should affirm transgender children. And I'm like, 10 years ago, Joe didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't give a shit about that.
Right.
But he's saying these things because that's what the culture is. So I think most politicians are reacting. I think the modern day media apparatus is ideological, right? Ideological to the point of idiocy. And so I do think within that, there are people who are true believers, and I think there are people who are malicious, and it's a mixture of the two. So it just really depends on who it is. Actually, there might be three. So the true believers, there are the malicious ones who know the truth, and then there are the ones who just play along, right? They're just like, listen, I work at MSNBC. Sure, I'm a liberal. I don't care. Like, they just play along. They'll say the things to keep their job. They don't really give a shit. But I hear what you're saying. It's tough to identify who's being malicious and who's just plain old stupid.
You end up having people in your circles like that too. So like I have a friend, he's an affirmed Democrat. By the way, I'm not an affirmed Republican. The last two elections, I don't mind telling people, I voted for the Libertarian candidate both times because I wanted the high ground of saying I voted, but neither one of these people is my fault. That was the reason. That was a legitimate reason. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump as a human being at all. Once he got in office, there was quite a bit that he did that I liked. There's a couple things that I didn't. But I have a friend who's I'm a Democrat now. I used to be more conservative, but now I'm a Democrat, and he lives close by. And we were talking. He was telling me one day, he goes, yeah, I hate to break it to my wife, but I'm going to vote for Governor DeSantis if he runs. She's not going to be happy with me, but she's going to have to deal with it because that's what I'm doing.
Right.
And within a month of that, he said to me, he goes, he lost me with the book banning. And I said, okay, stop for a second. I said, I don't care who you vote for, but it's not book banning. It's taking certain books out of circulation that are sexual in nature for students under the age of like 10, dude. I mean, he goes, no, the books are banned. I said, you find me one book you can't find in Florida. Find me one. I said, I will give you $10,000 if there's a book you cannot buy in Florida because the government banned it. Doesn't exist. I said, by the way, a lot of schools don't have Bibles. No, I'm not religious, but I have read the Bible. I've actually read it twice. It took 12 years. And it's a great book. I'm not overly religious at all. It was a great book. You know, some of the stories are really good and interesting and they make you think. I said, in a lot of these schools, they don't have Bibles, right? But you're not upset by that. Neither am I, by the way. But when you talk about book banning, it's not the true story behind it. It's words being used to lead you in a direction to believe something that isn't true at all. I said, now are you, so then I tell him all this, and he finally says to me, well, I don't care. That's how I feel about it. Okay, then we're done. Let's just have dinner. We don't have to talk about it again. And I will never understand that People, it's like, you just literally, you stopped because I told you something and you couldn't answer it. And it's not a victory for me. I think it's sad.
Right.
And then you went, well, I just don't want to hear it. I just don't like him anymore. Okay. It was the same thing with Vivek Ramaswamy, who I've actually interviewed. I think he's a great guy. I would support him if he were nominated. And Florida's a weird state. Like, I'm not a registered Republican, so I can't vote in that primary.
Oh, yeah.
I have to pick one or the other, I think. I forget. As an independent, I think I have to pick one or the other. I don't remember. But anyway, another guy said to me, oh, I feel like he's just Trump on steroids. I said, are you kidding? To me, he's Trump with no baggage. I mean, that would be the worst thing you could call him, is Trump without the baggage. He actually is much more well-spoken, thoughtful, not vulgar, doesn't insult people, does not have sexual scandals in his life. I don't think so anyway.
Right.
He doesn't even eat meat. You know, he's Hindu.
Right.
And I said, Trump on steroids is a bizarre description. And he goes, well, I watched that debate. Everything out of his mouth annoyed me. I said, okay, tell me a policy that bothers you of Vivek Ramaswamy, a policy. He just annoyed me. His voice annoys me. Okay, fine, fair enough.
So that's, to me, what I associate with that is a lot of people don't have time to do like what we do, research and dig for stuff. So what they end up doing is judging people in politics like how they would judge a person who's coming to their house, right? So they go off of intuition, how they sound, you know, their posture, all these different things. That's what the trope, I would have a beer with him, right? Because it's, you know, because they don't have any other information to kind of judge the person other than like, I like how he looks. Right.
He's presidential.
He's presidential. Yes, exactly. So it's off of feeling. It's not off of like actual policy or rhetoric. Like that stuff is very superficial. Like
I guess most people are single issue voters, right? I guess I just want them to know their issue. And at least know where the person stands on their issue, their one issue that they care about.
Yeah. I mean, but to go back to your original point, it's the power of language. The other example, speaking of Ron DeSantis, is don't say gay. Yeah. Right? I was like, these guys are geniuses when it comes to rhetoric.
It's nowhere in the bill.
It's nowhere there. But that is, even as we're talking about it, I can say that and we know what we're talking about.
Exactly.
And that's the power of rhetoric and propaganda. If you use it properly, use it to your advantage. They use it to their advantage. And so as someone who writes and I understand rhetoric and I see like you can use rhetoric for good and evil. So why don't you use rhetoric for good? So like how we talked about illegal immigration, instead of making it well, if they come here, you know, they take people's jobs. It sounds very like, you know, calculators. But that's not how you appeal to people. You appeal to people by appealing to people.
Right.
You say, there's human trafficking that's happening, right? Children are being smuggled. They're putting into sex trade. Women are being raped. This is the cause of not having a secure border, right? And the cartel is profiting off of human torture and turmoil. That is why we need a stronger border. See, that appeals to people, even if they're not Republican or whatever, that appeals to people because they're like, yeah, that's pretty terrible, what you just said, right? Arbitrarily, no one gives a shit like how many theoretical jobs they might take, even if it's true. But when you appeal to people, right, you elicit some sort of emotion, and the narrative I gave you is a true narrative, so it's not even manipulative. It's true. It's a real reason why you should oppose illegal immigration, why you should advocate for stronger borders, because this actually hurts people. Even non-Americans, it hurts. So it's that kind of thing that I want to see smarter rhetoric. And right now, I see dumb rhetoric. And I see a lot of people profiting off of stupidity. And it doesn't help them politically whatsoever. So I don't know. That's just my viewpoint.
It doesn't give you much hope, you know, as somebody who would wish or pray for or hope, however you want to word it, that people would just take 5 minutes. And even if you're just a single issue voter, figure out what your issue is and learn the stance of the people you want to vote for, starting locally.
Yeah.
And moving up the chain. The president just doesn't matter that much, you know, from a standpoint of how it affects your life directly.
Right.
The president's got about the least effect on your life over everyone.
I agree.
Every politician in the country. And it's one of the reasons I was upset when DeSantis ran, because I'm in Florida and I don't want him to leave here, you know, because it is just such an easy place to live.
Right.
You know, if you don't mind heat and the occasional hurricane, it's just an easy place to live from a tax perspective. And just, I don't know, it's a weird thing about sunshine and palm trees. People just seem to be less crabby. But
that's very true.
Yeah, I mean, I have a friend who her only thing is, what is your stance on abortion? Mm-hmm. And she's pro-life, and I have no problem with her being, I'm sorry, she's pro-choice. God, if she sees this and knows who I'm talking about, she'll get mad at me just for making that mistake. She's pro-choice, and if the candidate is not, she won't even consider it. She stops right there, no matter what the rest of the effect are, even though she's somebody who at this stage in her life it likely will never affect. I don't know why, I don't ask why, that's her issue. And she knows it inside and out. She knows who stands for what, where, and I have nothing but respect for that. I remember talking to a friend of mine. I lived in Los Angeles at the time. He's a hedge fund guy. And he was a native Southern Californian. And he goes, so your guy from Chicago is running, that Barack Obama. He's like, I love the guy. I'm like, you do? And he said, yeah. And I said, I would consider myself more of a Republican back then and less of an independent. And I said, what do you love about him? He was like, well, I just think, you know, he's honest and he's clean and he's different and he's all this. And I said, listen, he was a community organizer like 6 years ago. He came up in Chicago. Okay, honest is not a word anyone would use for a politician that rose that quickly through Chicago. I said, do a little investigation on how he got his property on the south side of Chicago and start looking into him a little bit more. And then if you still want to vote for him, great. And we had about a 2-hour conversation where I was telling him all the reasons I thought that Obama may not be what he thought he was. I don't know that I was right, but just, you know, living in Chicago most of my life, you become skeptical about local politicians and local politics. And finally he said, look, I just think it's time for a black president. I said, no problem.
Well, there you go.
I said, I have no problem with that if that's your view. But we needed to get to what your view honestly was before I could end the conversation. I don't care if that's why. Good for you. That's a good enough reason for you. Vote twice. I don't care. You know, I just want people to take a few minutes and figure out what they think, as opposed to just parroting stuff, whether it's from independent media or mainstream media. Stop parroting stuff. Just figure out what you are and what you think. It doesn't take that long.
It really doesn't. Well, we'll start to wrap this up, but I'd like to ask at the end, are you optimistic about the future?
Mine or countries?
Let's say the country.
Okay, the country. Unfortunately, I'm not. And a lot of it has to do with the Federal Reserve as much as politics. Unless we were able to replace the Federal Reserve with either nothing, which is not going to happen at this point, or an automated decision maker. And I don't mean AI, I mean just a math formula. Inflation is here, rates go here. Inflation is here, rates go here. So that everybody sees it and knows it. Then I'm really pessimistic on the U.S. economy over the next 10 years. I think a crisis the likes of which none of us are old enough to remember is coming. I really do, which is why I buy gold more than anything.
I gotcha. Generally speaking, I'm painfully optimistic about most things. So I tend to be optimistic from the standpoint of, I think we'll always have some sort of problem. Human history is filled with problems. But I always think like with problems comes progression and certain things get better eventually. But I think we're in a period where there are certain problems, and over a period of time, those problems will disappear and another set of problems will come up. And I think we are likely to experience what you were describing, but we'll see past it. You know, just like in 2008, that was really bad, and yet we're here, right? We made it through it, so to speak. So I'm optimistic that, culturally speaking, that things will get more, how would I say, closer to normal.
I'm optimistic about that.
Yeah.
Honestly, I am.
I think with such a strong cultural hit, it caused a recoil. And I'm part of that. I'm part of the 2020 cultural hit that forced me to do something, or try to be part of it and speak out. And I've met other people who reacted to 2020, right? People you don't even know who are reacting, who are doing something, who become advocates and gone to school board meetings and all these different things because they're like, enough of this. And I think that to me gives me optimism. I'd be less optimistic if that wasn't the case. If everybody just slowly complied and slowly accepted the bullshit that was happening. So those are the areas where I'm optimistic. But I think things will get slightly worse, but I think through the ashes we will rise.
I think people, unfortunately, right now are intellectually lazy. And I hope that changes. I would agree that I'm optimistic culturally because I think people are moving to the middle more rapidly than I think is being reported, for sure. But you and I are seeing it personally in our own lives, I'm sure. I mean, I've seen it in my life in a couple of places where people I never thought would move in certain directions. One specifically that I already talked about here is moving in directions simply because their common sense is being sort of woken up by, I don't want to use that word.
They got woke.
They got woke in a different direction. No, they're just kind of like coming to logic again, where they're like, this just doesn't make sense. I mean, I hate when you're staring at a sky and the government tells you that it's green. And I'm like, but I'm looking at it, it's blue.
Right.
I don't know, it's green. I on Hersey Ali the other day, and I don't know if you saw that interview with Jake Tapper.
No.
He basically said, what do you think about the border? And she said, our border is secure. And then went on about how we had to make all these changes. And even Jake Tapper was like, wait a minute, you think the border is secure? She said, our border is secure. We've got it secured. And he kept pressing her on it. And eventually she just went, that's a conversation for another day. And he kept going, well, you'll grant me that the border isn't secure, though, right? I agree with everything else you said, but you'll grant that. And she would not say it. And it was one of the recent tweets that I did. I said, this reminds me of, remember the song, It Wasn't Me? It's like, it wasn't me. That's what it reminded me of. She just kept saying, no, it's secure. No, don't believe your lying eyes. It's secure.
Right.
You know, and that kind of stuff just drives me crazy because there's people that support politicians that just, I don't want to say lie, because the minute I say lie, somebody says Trump lied too. They all lie. It's the uniparty you described.
Right.
They all lie. Right? But I'd like to see some of them take us in a direction. I think that's why RFK is so popular on the right, even though he wants government-funded loans for people to buy homes at half to less than half the rate.
That's a whole other story.
I mean, that's that's socialism described, and a lot of conservatives like RFK.
Right.
Because at least they feel he's being honest about the things they care about.
Right.
It's a mess, man. I'm glad you're optimistic. I'm glad you're working on it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for cooking dinner.
Oh, thanks for coming out. I appreciate it.
And inviting me into your home.
Always, anytime.
Yeah. And I completed my promise.
You
I
did.
came to Florida, and
You're not technically a promise keeper, but I'm going to call you that.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's good to see you.
Likewise.